Welcome back to Out with the New, In with the Old. Today, we're going into the decade of the 80s. Um, I could hardly think of any 80s cars I owned. And going back in time, uh, I always thought most 80s cars were a joke. I think I owned an 88 Ford F-150 with a 302 automatic, two-wheel drive. It was a nice truck. But when it came to the cars, I thought for the most part, they sucked. And it was kind of that timeline in my life where, I was used to cars from the 60s. And these cars, they didn't even have hardly any decent V8s anymore. I started to slowly come back in the late 80s, but cars got really kind of just sick. If the 70s were low powered, at least they had torque because they still had big engines. Now in the 80s, they all went to these small engines, and it just, I look at them differently now. But back then, I really didn't like them, and I stayed away from them. But we'll get started on them because they're really not that bad of cars. I got a whole different viewpoint on them now, especially with today's economy, the way things are, and also the fact that you could probably get them pretty cheap. Which I forgot to look up 80s cars for sale. But generally, you can find some 80s cars pretty cheap that are running good and, and not rusted out. Let's go over the cons. Complete loss of personality. I mean, for the most part, you look at something like a Chevy Citation or, and I mean, it's like just a boxy, fastbacky looking weird car. My dad bought one new, and I couldn't believe he did it because he was a car guy, but it was his, go to work car. And I was like, oh my, I've never saw anything like it. It was just like, I guess it was a decent car, but it was just no personality. And a lot of them were that way. Most of the personality was getting sucked out of most of the cars. There was a couple. Then there's cars like the Cadillac Cimarron, which was like a Chevy Cavalier with Cadillac emblems and leather interior. Just cars like that. Really just terrible. Build quality was terrible on most of the 80s cars. They didn't get any better. In fact, I think they may have gotten a hair worse. They were getting bad towards the late 70s, and that just continued into the 80s, at least through most of the 80s. And on that note, I will say that was the era Ford was a little better than everybody else. I mean, they weren't great, but they were better than General Motors and Chrysler. I wrote down cons as one of it is most of them were becoming front wheel drive, but I also wrote it as a pro. And that goes back to I like rear wheel drive cars, performance wise, handling wise, but if you live, like now, if you live in a place where it snows and you need transportation, it's a pro because most of those cars from the 80s that had front wheel drive will plow through snow better than a four-wheel drive pickup. They're really, really good. So I really shouldn't have wrote it as a con. It's a pro and a con depending on who you are, I guess. Terrible styling. I kind of said that with loss of personality. The loss of traditional large cars, which that was a big deal to me because I like big luxury cars. And they slowly disappeared. The Cadillac kind of stayed through the 80s. They had one model they kept, the Fleetwood Brougham. It was called by the end of the 80s. But the Sedan DeVille, the Eldorado, they all got shrunk down to little front-wheel drive cars. We lost the Bonneville. We lost the 98, the 88, all during the 80s. And I'm talking about the rear-wheel drive full-size ones. They still made the front-wheel drive ones. They made the front wheel drive cars and called them the same names as the rear wheel drive large cars, but they were gone. We lost Chrysler big cars. Lincoln still had a Continental. And Ford Mercury still had, the beginning of the Panther platform. But for a large part, a lot of them were gone. Pros, better handling. Cars did get better handling. When you drive one, if it's in good shape, they're nimble. They stay a lot flatter around turns. There was a lot more focus on cars handling at that time. And they also lost a lot of weight compared to the cars before them. So that helped. And it was kind of like they were starting to want to compete with European cars, because through all this bad quality, the European cars were getting more sales in the United States. And I think they saw that, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler saw that they were losing sales, and they were trying to make cars that could compete somewhat with the European cars. So they had to handle better. Performance slowly coming back. And I say slowly, I mean slowly, because through the mid-'80s, there was cars that had like 115 horsepower that weighed 3,500 pounds. I mean, they were just terrible. In fact, in the 80s shopping you'll probably be looking at cars from like 85, 86 on, because before that 80 to 85 spell was pretty bad. Again, front wheel drive. It is a pro. Nowadays, I think it's a pro for somebody who's going to use one for transportation and they get weather. It's a big plus. Beginning of computers, and I mean the beginning. I don't know. It's not a big deal. And fuel injection was starting to come into its own, and it wasn't bad. I mean, the throttle body fuel injections were a little bit troublesome, but they weren't any worse than the carburetor, I guess. They were searching every which way they could to get better fuel mileage. Yeah, my father had a Citation. My mother had she had an 86 88, which was a front wheel drive car, and it was a good car. I thought it was stone cold ugly, but it was a good car. It rode nice, drove nice, handled nice, had the indestructible 3.8 engine. I also had an 89 F-250, which that is probably one of my favorite trucks I ever had. A regular cab, 89 F-250. It had a 351, which most of them seem to have 460s in them. Mine had a 351 with a 410 rear end and a standard C6, no overdrive. And that truck was a good pulling truck. It was a good truck. I kept it a long time. But when I talk about the return of performance, we had the Grand National. It started off as the Regal T-Type with the turbo, and slowly morphed into the Grand National, which eventually morphed into the GNX, which is still a quick car by today's standards. The Corvette in '84 came back as performance, and believe it or not, even though those cars aren't that great performance-wise, at that time, they were world-class cars, handling and performance-wise. And they got better as the 80s went on, and by the end of the 80s, they weren't that bad. They were pretty decent performing cars. The Mustang GT started to come into its own. I was in the Navy when our chief got one of the first GTs, and it was a 302, the Fox Body GT 302 two-barrel. And but it was the beginning of, I think it had 179 horsepower that first year, and I remember him. He was a car guy. He put a 4-barrel and headers on it, no cam change, and he went to the track and raced it, and it did pretty good. He really woke it up with the 4-barrel and the headers, and tuning that carb with the stock cam. The car it was pretty potent. The Camaros and the Firebirds slowly started to come into their own. They weren't great, but by the end, they handled great. I've driven a couple of those, and they are great handling cars. The Z28s, they are really great handling. They just had the 305 for most of it. But when the tune port injection came out, they got a lot better. They were decent, especially when you consider the era, because nothing was fast. I kind of feel bad. I forgot to look up used ones. Anyway, I know I do see them on Marketplace quite a bit. I found lots of 70s cars, and I wrote down 3 of them. I know there's lots of 80 cars out there, and they are durable. They're kind of like the 70s cars. Drivetrain-wise, they're durable and tough. Construction quality-wise, body, interior, they're kind of junky. But you know, you deal with that, and you got a good platform to drive back and forth to work. They get a much better fuel mileage than the 70s cars did. This is where fuel mileage was starting to come around, and cars were doing pretty good. Those 88s and those front wheel drive platform General Motors cars, they get close to 30 miles to the gallon, and they perform decent. They're not bad cars. Like I said, for this channel, we're mostly looking at transportation, and those are good transportation. Parts are readily available. They're easy to work on. They're not complicated. I had a 79 Eldorado, which was the first year of that downsized Eldorado, and it came with a 350 fuel-injected Oldsmobile engine, which was pretty good. It actually felt torquey and nice. And I think they kept that engine another year. And then it went to getting a 364 Cadillac engine for 1 year. And then after that, which would have been 81. So from 82 on, that same body style Eldorado had a 4.1 liter. And they were terrible. That engine was terrible as far as reliability. It was terrible as far as power. It just wasn't a great engine. It morphed into a good engine when it went to the 4.5 and 4.9, but when it came the first few years through the, like I said, if you're looking at 80s cars, I'd almost wouldn't even look at hardly anything. There's a few, but for the most part, I wouldn't even start looking till like 85 to 89. There's a couple in there, but for the most part, 85 to 89 is where you'll be looking. And maybe tomorrow, before I go through the 90s cars, I'll just list a few 80s cars just so we can see what they're going for. They're usually cheaper than the 60s or 70s cars. I mean, I think you can pick them up for $3,000 and have a good, reliable car. I know a lot of people, you get on YouTube and all these guys use cars, you got to have 10 grand. You don't have to have that kind of money. I'm driving a minivan I bought for $2,000, and now I'm on 2 years with it. And I mean, knock on wood, I haven't done anything to it other than put tires and front brakes on it. And everything works, AC, all that. It's a decent little minivan. It's an Oldsmobile. You know, it's got the typical plastic interior, but I also had a 91 Olds 88 or 98. And I mention it because it was pretty much the same as an 89. I mean, the car is the same thing. And it was a good car. It was the typical bulletproof engine transmission, but the junk interior, you know, body. It had plastic front fenders. You know, they did weird things on cars back then, but that car got 28, 29 miles to the gallon. It went down the road smooth. It was powerful enough to pass people wherever you were. I mean, it was a decent little car. And I would say, you know, it's exactly like an 89, 98. It's the same exact car. In fact, they redesigned, went through them in 92, and it was funny because my 91 was produced like in June of 91. And I know a couple of times I had to buy parts, and I would say, give them 91 parts, and they didn't work. And I had to get 92, model year 92 parts. The car was built so late in the year that it had some 92 stuff on it. And that'll happen sometimes. You get a car built at the end of the year. Anyway, it was a good car. And so I know there's some good cars from the 80s. And tomorrow, when I do the 90s cars, I'll go through, my first thing I'll do is I'll go through some 80s ads I find, just so we can see what they're going for. Anyway, that's a quick rundown on the cars of the 80s. And tomorrow or the next day, we'll go into the 90s. Thanks for watching.